8. Documenting your code and Git commands in depth. In this video, I'll be explaining why documentation matters, as well as some common practices for documenting your code. To get this video started, I'm going to go over tagging your code and associating version numbers with individual commits. Now you may be wondering, what is a version number? If you go to software like Node.js or Bootstrap or PHP, you'll see that they have numbers available. The current version of Node.js at the time of this video is 6.7.0. Bootstrap, it's 3.3.7. You go to PHP and you have two options of 7.0.11 or 5.6.26. Now what do these numbers mean and how do you use them? How do developers use them? Well, the standard convention is as follows. You have your first number, which is your major version, your second number, which is your minor version, and your third version, which is your bug fix or patch version. And it goes as follows. Use case is if you make some changes and take care of a known issue, you want to make a new release of your code, you associate it with a patch number. You update the patch, change it from 4.6.0 to 4.6.01 or something. You make a series of patches or perhaps add some additional functionality or new features, update the minor version, change 4.6 to 4.7. Now, as the convention goes, anything from the minor version and downwards is backwards compatible. This means that any software that was written when you had version 2.1 out should work just fine with the version of your code that is 2.8, as well as anything in between. 2.4, 2.5, your code should still run and not cause any issues. Now, when it comes to major versions, or the first number, all bets are off, as a first number version change usually indicates a complete rewrite of your software, or perhaps enough changes to the point where originally written code is no longer stable or no longer reliable. And this comes in handy for other developers in that they can compare the version of code they have against the version of code that you are either writing with or currently producing, and determine whether or not their code is even compatible anymore. And I'm going to show you in Git how to associate a version number with a tag inside of your code. Now if I run git tag right now, you can see we have version 0.0.1, and I've just created this real quick for demonstration purposes. I'm going to show you what happens if we make an additional tag. Let's say we make some changes. We can associate a message with our commit, and now we can run a git tag command. Let's just assume this is version 0.0.2. -m for message, and let's just give that a message. Now if we run the git tag, you can see we've made some changes. You can see you have 0.0.1 and 0.0.2 available. You can go into depth of this one by running git show and then the version number, in this case v0.0.2. And this will, by default, immediately show you the commit message with the message we gave it, the version number with the message we gave that, as well as the individual changes. You can see here the difference between version 0.0.1 and 0.0.2 is one line that we added just after our HTML tag. And that's how versioning works. But let's say we don't want that. Removing a tag is quite simple. You can simply run git tag -d instead of adding it. You just run -d and then the version number, in this case v0.0.2. Now to run a git tag now, you can see version 0.0.1 is the only one that exists. So tagging is a completely reversible process. Just make sure you go back and remove the commits as well, if you want to get rid of it entirely. You can roll back or reset a commit, but if the version number still exists, you can always reset to a version number as well. And this is what makes them so useful. If you have a bug that arose in version 2.3.2, you can always roll back to 2.3.1 instead of having to go through and find the exact SSH key from a git log and having to pull the randomly generated 32-character string. You can just pull a version number. That, and of course, you can also associate specific documentation with version numbers. And at this point, you should already be familiar with documentation and why it matters. After all, it gives you a chance to create a README and play around with it to inform both your developers and your users of what your code does, why it works, as well as any known issues. And we all know reading documentation that hasn't been done correctly is a pain in the ass. So, I'm going to show you why and how you can document your code. Tagging your code is one way. However, here's why it's important. I can run git --help and immediately have access to all of this commands right here explaining what something does, how it works, and why it works. And yes, this is an example of documentation right in the command line. Somebody wrote this. And you can get to even further detail. If you ever need help with any specific git command, you can run git. In this case, I'm going to go with remote, as we want to do remote, but we don't know what we're going to do. You can run --help. And this is a built-in documentation feature of Git. With the --help flag on the end of any command, you can immediately access the manual and usages and documentation for that specific command. Here's how it works: name, synopsis, options, description, and all the options in detail. Yes, this is documentation at its finest, and a classic example of why you would want to document your projects. Keep in mind some things with this. There are libraries that will auto-generate documentation for you. JSDocs is a classic example of this, and something of an industry standard amongst the JavaScript developers. That end, when it comes to documentation, your individual workplace or perhaps client may have some specific requests or examples of how they want it done. It's best to defer this part of the process to them. But in any case, make sure your documentation is clear, concise, and fills its purpose, which is making the development process, or perhaps usage process, as streamlined and easy as possible. And that is tagging and documentation in a nutshell. See ya.